want to tell you a bit about my story, because it's the story of everybody in this room, and it's not only a Canadian story, it's a conservative story. My Canadian story started in the Second World War in 1940 in Hong Kong. My father and my mother were both immigrants to this country. I'm a kid of immigrant parents. My father was a Chinese immigrant. He came here from Hong Kong in 1952, and my mother was a Dutch immigrant. And she came here from the Netherlands in the 1960s. And my father, being born in Hong Kong in 1929, watched as Canadian soldiers in the very first land combat engagement of the Second World War, he watched as these Canadian soldiers, Canadian boys, they were all young men, defended Hong Kong from a vicious attack. My father was about 11 years old at the time. He watched as Canadian soldiers from the Royal Rifles of Canada and the Winnipeg Grenadiers defended him and his family on Hong Kong Island during those dark days of that December during that. Hundreds of soldiers died in that battle. They're all buried on Hong Kong Island. And hundreds more died in prisoner of war camps after the war as they starved and were beaten to death. My father never forgot that sacrifice. And so too with my mother. My mother's family was liberated by Canadian soldiers in the Netherlands in the spring of 1945. Over 6,000 of them died in the Netherlands alone, and they are all buried there in Commonwealth Way grave war cemeteries. They died so that my mother and her family could live. So I literally owe everything to this country. I would not be in front of you here today were it not for the sacrifices of Canadian soldiers in 2 theaters of war, one in Asia, one in Europe. And not only was my family defended and liberated by Canadian soldiers, after the war, they came to Canada in the 1950s and 60s to establish for themselves and their future children a life of hope and opportunity. That is a Canadian story, but it's also a conservative story. Because when my parents arrived here, they worked hard, they counted their pennies, and they put everything into investing for their children's future. And that, my friends, is the story of conservatives. It's about looking ahead at the future, about selfless sacrifice for those who are yet to come. Now, my wife's family has a very different story. My wife's family is of Scottish descent. They immigrated from Scotland in 1830 from a place in eastern Scotland called Dundee, Scotland. And they were Davidsons. So the clan Davidson has been here for generations. They arrived in the port of Montreal in 1830, and so they've been here for many, many generations. And so my wife and I, we met at university. We have 3 young kids. We live on a farm outside of Fergus, Ontario, which is about an hour and a half northwest of the city. And, I tell you this story because it's a reflection of the future of where this country is going. My wife took my last name, so she goes by Chong. When our kids were born, she said to me, well, they get the Chinese last name of Chong, and they're going to get the Scottish first names of William, Alistair, and Cameron. So they've all got her forebears Scottish first names. And I do have a Clan Davidson kilt with the jacket, and I go to the Scottish Highland Games in my hometown of Fergus every second Saturday of August since I've been an elected member of Parliament. And the joke around the Chong house is that it's not the Davidson tartan, it's the McChong tartan. So that's the story of this country. It's a story that's reflected in every one of you in this room. People who have recently arrived in the last couple of decades, and people who have been here for generations, who have come to this promised land to make a new life of hope and opportunity. And this story is a conservative story, and we have to tell these stories to reach out to Canadians so that they see in our party the vehicle for their hopes, dreams, and aspirations. And I'm in this leadership race because I believe in this country, I believe in this party, and I believe this party is the party to take this country forward. I'm in this leadership race because I believe that it's time for conservatives to reach out to new people to join our coalition. It's also time for us to renew the party with policies that are based on conservative principles such as balanced budgets, lower taxes, a flatter, simpler, corporate, and personal